Welcome to Soccer Morning on Backheel.com. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome in here to Soccer Morning, brought to you by WorldSoccerTalk.com. I hope you are partaking of the live program at WorldSoccerTalk.com/live. That is the home for Soccer Morning every weekday from 10 to 11 or 15 usually Eastern Time. Big show for you today. You may have watched a ton of soccer this weekend. You may have even partaken in the Oscar nonsense that happened last night. Who stays up for the entire length of the Oscars? They do Best Picture last, and I think it happened at midnight. Now, I was up. I had some writing to do. I'm a night owl anyway. But who stays up and watches like 4 hours of the Oscars? I like Neil Patrick Harris as much as the next guy. Well, not all guys, but I like Neil Patrick Harris, and I'm just not going to sit up for that. This is going to be a better show than the Oscars. I can guarantee it. This Soccer Morning will be better than the Oscars. Take that to the bank. Kristan Heneage will join us in just a couple of minutes to go over the Premier League weekend. Lots and lots of controversy, lots of interesting results in the Premier League. Chelsea, Manchester United, some fascinating stuff happening. Jose Mourinho being Jose Mourinho. We may pick Kristan Heneage's brain about the reports that Josie Altidore had as many as 7 offers in Europe that he ultimately turned down to make his return to MLS. That's all good stuff. At 10:30 a.m. Eastern, David Amoyal will join us. We'll talk Serie A with him. Specifically, we'll talk Parma. Bottom of the table in Serie A, likely to be relegated anyway, and yet they may have a forced relegation based on the fact the club's about to go bankrupt. That's never good. And I know there's plenty of opinion out there in Serie A that this isn't the end or this isn't a bad thing. Football will survive. You can't have clubs like Parma going bankrupt, being automatically relegated, having all of their results turned into losses. They only have 5 that are not losses this season so far. But still, that's not good. In preparation for Kristan Heneage, let's do the headlines. Again, a lot of Premier League stuff to talk about. Chelsea drawing Burnley 1-1. Jose Mourinho in the aftermath of that game dancing around 4 crucial moments, 4 key moments for his Blues in a game that represents dropped points for the league leaders. Clearly, Matic's red card is a matter of contention. Ashley Barnes goes in with a very, very ugly tackle. There were penalty claims, a couple of different moments for Chelsea that they were not given, and they decided the result. And Burnley escapes with a 1-1 draw. Now, we will open up this question later on, but I'm going to use this game and some of the other things that happened this weekend to, again, address the issue of officiating in the world of soccer. Can one man do this job anymore? Is it possible? More often than not, we're complaining about the referees, and yes, that's the nature of our fandom, of our tribalism. But sometimes even the completely unbiased observer is going to call foul, no pun intended, on some of these refereeing performances. And that game against Burnley for Chelsea clearly represented some poor officiating. Swansea beat Manchester United 2-1. That's a surprise. Bit of a blow for the Reds. Again, uptick in the discussion about whether Louis van Gaal is the kind of guy that get this team back where they need to be. Opinion out there that David Moyes would already be fired if he was getting the same results or at the same point as Louis van Gaal. Now, that's, I think, Louis van Gaal's reputation. Louis van Gaal's history buys him some extra leash that David Moyes clearly did not get. Is he the right man? Is Louis van Gaal the right man for Manchester United? Difficult to say. And they were going to have a tough time getting back to their previous standard anyway. But it is interesting to see the fan reaction to results like this and to soccer, to a style of football that is not always the most pleasing to watch. Also in the Premier League, City gains ground on Chelsea by destroying Newcastle United 5-0. I watched when did they score the third? Because that's when I turned that game off. That's when I decided that game was a foregone conclusion and moved on to other things in my day. Now, maybe I would have enjoyed the other 2 goals. And clearly, Manchester City can play some wonderful football if they want to. Now City has moved within 5 points of Chelsea at the top of the table. Still seems like a big gap at this point in the season, but you never know. Jeff Carlisle back in the States. Jeff Carlisle reporting that neither side is budging on the free agency question when it comes to the MLS CBA negotiations. But the players and the owners are dug in. The players want it. The owners do not. We are 2 weeks away from the season, people. A little bit less than that now. I'm starting to worry that strike is imminent. That strike is coming. If you weren't already sold, maybe you are now with the clock ticking down. We had trouble in Brazil. 100 fans arrested due to violence ahead of a game between Fluminense and Vasco da Gama. It's part of the Rio State Championships. Not what you want to see. Police having to break up many fights between the fans in Brazil. Again, we discussed this issue last week on the show. The distance, the gap between the way some football fans express themselves around the world. I don't care if it's racism or violence or homophobia. All of it's bad. All of it needs to be squashed. All of it needs to go away. And yet, is there even a path to get there? Barcelona dropped big points against Malaga at home this weekend, while Real Madrid beat Elche 2-0, putting Real Madrid now 4 points ahead of Barcelona in the La Liga race. That's a big weekend in this season in Spain. With Atletico Madrid dropping off the pace, Real Madrid getting back on the winning side of things, and Barcelona dropping points at home, being shut out by Malaga. Big deal. Barcelona fans, by the way, in response to being investigated over those chants about Cristiano Ronaldo being a drunk, decided that they were going to chant, Cristiano does not drink water at this match against Malaga. Even when their team is losing a game they crucially needed against a team that they should beat, and let's be honest, Barcelona should beat everybody in La Liga, the fans there are still taking shots at the star of the rival, because that's the way Spain works. Setting this up for David Amoyal in a little bit, I remember at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, Parma on the edge of bankruptcy. If declared bankrupt, all results will be voided, become defeats. Right now, they're bottom of the table with 10 points, 3 wins, and a draw. I said five non-losses earlier. I meant 4. They have 10 points. So there you go. Let's set this up. Premier League coming up with Kristan Heneage. Should be a good discussion. Again, plenty of talking points over in England as some interesting things happening, officiating results, and the like. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, brought to you by WorldSoccerTalk.com.
do 1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on backheel.com with Jason Davis.
Here we go, back on Soccer Morning, finally. Apparently, I'm going to call random people around the world and ask them about football. I didn't mean to. I meant to get Kristan Heneage on the line, and I finally did that. You can find him numerous places, a Football Report, ITV, Guardian. How you doing, Kristan?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, and I know that you are a football expert, as opposed to that gentleman I called who was very confused as to why he was receiving a call from an American about, I didn't even mention football. Kristan, we had an interesting weekend in the Premier League. I outlined some of the results at the top of the program. I'm going to start with Chelsea because not only was that a bit of a surprising match, but we had a controversial red card, a couple of shouts for penalties, and Jose Mourinho doing that thing he does now where he criticizes referees without actually saying anything so he can, quote unquote, avoid being punished for it. The big moments in the match, those moments that obviously Jose was upset about, what did you make of them? What did you make of Matic's red card?
I saw certain points with what he was trying to say in terms of the minutes that he outlined and also the Matic red card. The problem he has is, and this is a problem I'm sure you and I also heard when we used to play youth soccer, was it's not your job to enact retribution.
Sure.
In terms of, yes, Ashley Barnes went over the top of Matic. In fairness, that's not the first time I've seen Ashley Barnes bend the rules of the game this season. The problem is that that's what the referee's for. He's the arbitrator. He will sort the situation with Ashley Barnes out, and it's not for you to try and give justice yourself, because two wrongs don't make a right.
Sure.
And that's where I think Mourinho perhaps has these blue-tinted specs on and doesn't quite see that, yes, I can completely see why Matic is frustrated, because that's a potential leg-breaking tackle that essentially would have taken him out of the Capital One Cup final. It would have taken him out of the Champions League run. It would have ended his season. So, of course, he's frustrated. But in those moments, you have to really keep your calm, keep your composure, and just reiterate the fact that the referee will sort this situation. I think where he now has grounds to really be frustrated is that there will be no charge for Ashley Barnes, because whether you say that it's momentum or what have you carrying him over into that tackle, it's still a horrible tackle. It's still right on the part of the leg where essentially things could snap, and we've seen players suffer truly horrendous leg breaks from.
That I think is the biggest moment of the match, just because of the red card, which obviously changed the complexion for Chelsea coming down the stretch of the game. But there were obviously other moments earlier in the match that could have turned things Chelsea's way. You had a handball penalty that wasn't called. You had Ashley Barnes involved in a tackle with Ivanovic. These moments, I think there's that perception, Kristan, that these moments always go to the big club. Certainly Manchester United seems to be accused of getting biased refereeing on a regular basis. Is that the case here? I guess what the conclusion we come to is that officiating is difficult, and quite often we get poor performances, just as players sometimes put out poor performances.
Of course, I think we have to accept as well that we as a footballing community don't give referees the proper and just tools with which to complete the task to the best of their ability. We have technology now that could aid their performance significantly, and for whatever reason, those at the very top of the game don't see fit to enact those pieces of technology. We're certainly seeing these discussions, but for me, these discussions are long after the horse is bolted, long after we've self-included, criticized referees to the point where you question why you would become a referee if you're a young 20-something plying your trade in the lower leagues, trying to build your way up that football pyramid. And I think in relation to the penalty call, for example, that to me isn't a penalty because it hits his leg and goes up to his arm. It has to be the hand or the arm, rather, motioning towards the ball. And that's where the problem is that essentially, much like at the stadium, you can call for anything you want. And yet if you get it wrong, there's no kind of evaluation of your call or your misinterpretation of the law, but because the referee is the arbiter and essentially the rule maker, any mistake they make is glaringly highlighted, is dissected. We question if they're fit enough. I mean, even Mourinho has questioned if some of these referees are fit enough. Sure. I think that's disgraceful personally to do that, because by all means, question the lack of consistency in decisions, question those higher up who aren't giving the referees these facilities to work with to the best of their ability. But I think to question someone's professionalism like that is bordering on misconduct himself, and rightly so. He's been punished for that. And now he's trying to play this game where he skirts around things. And I think this is why he loves England, because he can do this. Whereas if you look at Italy, Italy didn't really stand for it. They asked him questions, very hard questions, and he was forced to answer them. And when he came out with these inflammatory statements about Ranieri and such like, he was held to account for them. Whereas here, it seems almost as if in England we pandered to him. I know on Sunday, Sky Sports shifted their intended guest, James Beattie, the former Southampton striker, to make way for Jose Mourinho on their programme, and they announced it some 20 minutes before. And he essentially held court over the Premier League weekend, and in truth, the presenters looked intimidated to be around him. And yet for me, this is the kind of situation where we should be holding him to account and asking him the tough questions and forcing him to give an answer on record.
His act, and it certainly is an act, still fascinates me. He always manages to convey this outward appearance of not caring, and yet it's very clear that he cares deeply, and he's commenting in a way that again sort of deflects criticism from himself, especially in England. Now, coming back to the issue of refereeing, and I don't want to make this entire discussion about this because we have other games to cover, but when it comes to refereeing, it seems to me we often complain about the symptom rather than addressing the root cause, which is what you just said. These referees don't have the tools to do the job in a modern context. 25 years ago, sure, maybe fit enough to cover most of the pitch, maybe able to see most incidents. Certainly, you had a rougher game, so more things got by. Referees didn't have to pull their whistle quite as often. In this situation, what we're essentially saying is referees are fallible, and either we deal with that fact and we accept it and we appreciate sort of the controversy and the entertainment value that lies within a game like this, a match like this, or we address the problem. And what steps can be made, Kristan?
We have to enact that technology. Without wishing to sound like the billion-dollar man introduction, we have the technology. We can rebuild the situation. We can give them replays. We can give them opportunities to breathe and let the situation just take a minute, so that we can make the best decisions, so that we influence things in the correct and proper way, so that we don't have these debates of, well, is it the big teams that get the decisions consistently? I remember there being a report conducted possibly over a decade now that said at Old Trafford, Manchester United got 4 out of 5 of the 50-50 decisions that were contested there. For me, situations like that and these kind of debates become asinine because we can't change it. All we can do is change the future that's about to approach us, and we do that by putting the referees in the best situation so that they aren't the sole bearers of the injustice. They aren't the people that we turn to and blame. We say, actually, it's due to all of us. We all have a responsibility to make sure that we lobby FIFA as journalists and media people, and perhaps even fans lobby FIFA to say, look, there's a lot of money riding on these games as well. There's a lot invested in the game in its entirety, and consequently we want the best available decision making, whether that be artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence and the eye of the referee who should be respected.
I think it comes down to the basic question of whether or not we're striving for a perfect game. It's impossible to get there, but I suppose it's a basic philosophical question of whether or not you want to push towards a perfectly called game, or if you can live with, again, some of these moments and some of these controversies. You don't want people's livelihoods to turn on one call or another. And certainly when a player like Ashley Barnes goes in on Matic and it's a potentially a leg breaking tackle, you want to try to stamp that out, but you can't always account for player behavior. I don't know. There's lots of things at play here. I tend to lean towards human error as part of the game, Kristan, and I maybe I will get upset if my team is punished by a poor call, but I think on the whole, I'm willing to live with some of these things.
And you're completely entitled to it, and I don't blame you for feeling that way, that it is the spontaneity of sport to have those kind of moments. But personally, I look at things like Frank Lampard's goal against Germany in South Africa. I look at title deciders, moments like that, relegation deciders. These are moments that impact clubs significantly. If a team hypothetically goes down from the Premier League this season, they have to cut their budgets. Maybe they have to let staff from the front office and the back room go.
It's true.
It's those little tributaries that feed out into things. And perhaps I'm being too idealistic, but I just want the right outcome to be as prevalent as possible within the game, so that there is no case of that bitterness and that resentment, so that we can have as pure a game as possible.
Speaking of the right outcome, Swansea beat Manchester United this weekend 2-1. Was that the right outcome? What exactly limited Manchester United in an attempt to continue their climb up the table?
I think they're just passing for passing's sake. That was certainly the criticism that was levelled at Louis van Gaal when he was at Bayern Munich, that yes, they had the possession and that was wonderful and it looked good on paper, but ultimately it didn't achieve anything. These were sideways passes. It's not, as we look at Pep Guardiola for comparison, this incisive, deconstructive passing that really does cut through teams. And I think you look at the weekend, the defensive issues were a problem again. Consistently, we're seeing Van Gaal say that he thinks he's found his best team, and then it changes again. And just the diamond in general is not really where I think Man United are best suited. It has to be a flat four in that middle. I think Daley Blind is constantly being pulled around and moved around into positions. And while he's versatile and can play those positions, he can't play three of them in the same game. He needs to have some kind of consistency to him. And the same with Ander Herrera. There's a lot of new players coming into the system, and you're almost overloading them with information. I think you have to remember that a footballer can only take in so much when you factor in they have a language to learn, they have a climate to get used to, a style of play even, not just from the manager, but also the new league they're entering. And for me, that shows consistently with Manchester United that there's just not that fluency there. There's not that high tempo that we associate with them. And it's because there's been such wide-reaching, such sweeping changes through that team this season, to the point where they're just not communicating like teammates would.
Robin van Persie left that match on crutches with a walking boot. I'm not sure exactly what that means for his immediate future, but he's dealt with injuries, and now you wonder if it's finally going to be Falcao's turn. And I have to ask you, what do you make of the fact that Louis van Gaal has yet to be able to leverage Falcao's ability, and you have Angel Di Maria? There's this kind of push-pull, whether or not it's Van Gaal's fault that Di Maria is not playing well, or if Di Maria is just not suited for the Premier League and this team. We're very talented players, Christian.
Yeah, of course, they are exceptionally talented players. Di Maria in particular really did light up the Premier League in the beginning. I think they're just trying to find the best place for him. I think, personally, out wide is where he's going to work best for Manchester United, just because it focuses him almost. I feel when you put him in the middle, you give him too many options. That works for some players like, say, Riquelme or players like that. But you look at someone like Di Maria or Ben Arfa, these players that have so much swirling in their head. Too many avenues is a bad idea, because then they don't know which one to pick. If you give them a channel to run at people, to really drive at a fullback in the way that you could with a wide position, I think Di Maria would have a lot more impact for Manchester United. And Falcao, I think, essentially, Van Gaal is playing a very smart, shrewd game, because that's a significant investment if they purchase him from Monaco at the end of the season. I see Monaco are saying that there are a number of high-class teams interested in Falcao. I'm not seeing that reflected in the back pages. I'm hearing Monaco say that a lot, and I would imagine they are, because they probably want to cash in and sell Radamel Falcao. But if you're saying that based on his performances for Manchester United this season, I would encourage those scouting teams to have another look, because for me, he has looked off the pace. And with questions about his age and whether he maybe had been slightly dishonest earlier in his career, the knee injuries that have really, I think, started to take a toll on him in a more physical, faster-paced league, I see no reason to keep throwing him in there and keep racking up those games if we're to believe this idea that it's an appearance clause, Mark, that when he hits a certain number of games, Man United are obligated to purchase him, which is a theme we're starting to see with more and more deals now in Europe.
Rest of the results from the league very, very quickly. Manchester United 5, Newcastle 0. A solid performance by Manchester City. Absolutely destroyed Newcastle. Any thoughts on City's form at the moment, and whether or not, again, 5 points back now with Chelsea dropping points against Burnley, a chance for them perhaps to give Chelsea a run?
Of course, the concern for them is the dueling with the Champions League and what have you, because Yaya Toure, I thought, was instrumental again in destroying Newcastle on Saturday. He misses the Barcelona game, which again puts further questions in a further microscope up to Fernandinho and Fernando, who for me haven't really been dynamic enough in the final third this season. I think Manchester City as a club will always have these kind of results where they do just demolish a team and you question why they aren't doing better. It's just that consistency. I think it's finding that squad and finding that fluency, which they seem to struggle with. And I'm still not entirely sure why they have that fluency issue, because it seems much like with Chelsea, they started fantastically and Aguero looked razor sharp, and now there's just that little dip with them missing Toure. And I don't think it's just down to one player. I think that's too reductionist.
Southampton, Liverpool. Southampton obviously aggrieved over the lack of a call on Mignolet coming out of the box and handling the ball. Was that the wrong decision for you? And did that result flatter Liverpool a bit?
Yeah, and I must confess, I agree with Ryan Bertrand, who tweeted minute 4. Clearly, Jose Mourinho had some influence on him while he was at Chelsea. I think they have every right to feel incredibly aggrieved at the fact they didn't get a penalty for that. But on the positive side for Liverpool, if you're a Liverpool fan and you want to be happy, Simon Mignolet is now 3rd in the league for clean sheets behind Fraser Forster and Ben Forster. And they're doing fantastic things, and they're starting to put it together. They've cut Manchester United's gap from 10 points after Boxing Day till 2. And it seems as if Brendan Rodgers is finally starting to get what he wants from this team. Well,
Coutinho's goal, I mean, that's just a brilliant individual moment for him, and he's been one of Liverpool's key players this year. Very, very quickly before I let you go, I'm going to come back to Jozy Altidore. Left your neck of the woods very recently to go join TFC. And we've got news out of Toronto where Jozy himself has said that he had 4 offers in Germany, 2 offers in France, a Premier League loan possibility. Now, he signed for a lot of money in Toronto. We all understand why he made that move. Should we be surprised by the amount of interest that he had, or were some of these quote unquote offers a little less than that?
No, I think we shouldn't be surprised at all. Jozy Altidore is still a United States international with a fantastic record for his country, a fantastic record for us at Alkmaar, and a player that for me is in the prime of his career or moving into that phase of his career. I know for a fact that Lille were very interested in him in France because they've had some striking issues up front. And equally, you have to remember that just because a player is poor in England does not mean that is the death knell of their career. Diego Forlan is perhaps the greatest example of players who haven't shone in the Premier League, but have gone abroad and found their league and found their style of play. So it shouldn't surprise me at all. I think, if anything, it's quite a coup for MLS to be able to say that they were able to convince him that his future lay there, because I imagine it was more than just money, because from speaking to Jozy, from being around him, I get the feeling that financial implications aren't his greatest motivator in that sense. I feel for him it's about the soccer, it's about where he's going to play, what he's going to achieve, and he clearly thinks he can achieve something at Toronto.
Yeah, I believe Michael Bradley being there was a major factor for him. I mean, I think he has a very good relationship with Michael Bradley, and I think Michael Bradley, despite only being a few years older, is maybe a bit of a mentor to Jozy in this situation, an opportunity to reclaim his career at home. I mean, it's Canada, but it's still MLS. Has got to be a good thing for Jozy Altidore. Kristan Heneage, go follow him on Twitter. It's KHENA. Sorry, I'm gonna try it again, Kristan. KHENEAGE. There you go. He's covering football for many different outlets from over in Northeast England. Thank you very much for your time, Kristan. I appreciate it.
A pleasure as always, mate. Hopefully speak to you soon.
There you go. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to grab David Amoyal and shift to Serie A. Parma's in trouble. We'll take a look at the table. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning brought to you by World Soccer Talk. Be right back.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on backheel.com with Jason Davis.
Soccer Morning brought to you by World Soccer Talk. We shift now to that country that looks like a boot. I've been listening to a podcast, The History of Rome, so I'm all into Italy right now. David Amoyal joins us, talk some Serie A, Calcio as it is. David, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. Let's start a look. The league season continues. There's certainly things to talk about in terms of results. Roma maybe disappointing a little bit. Juve at the top as always. But the story right now is Parma and the financial condition of the club. They are bottom of the table in Serie A at the moment, and there may be some punishments that really don't have a big practical effect. But anytime a club like Parma is being threatened by bankruptcy, their alarm bells are going off in Italy, I imagine.
Certainly. And, this is a situation that is becoming worse every day. And if you remember, it was just last May that Parma had qualified for the Europa League. I still remember seeing the players celebrating on the pitch, making it to European competition. Donadoni was being hailed as a potential candidate to join Milan as coach. And look how quickly things have gone sour. Things became alarming once Parma was unable to play in the Europa League because they weren't able to make some payments that made them eligible to play in European competitions. And since then, we've had 2 ownership changes. The team wasn't able to play their game on Friday because they weren't able to pay the personnel at the stadium and the electricity at the stadium, so the match had to be postponed. So that's how dire the situation is for them right now.
What I read at this point says that I'm a little confused as to where they are in the process right now of the review of the club and whether or not they're going to be declared bankrupt or obviously in England we talk about going into administration. What's the process in Italy and what's the ultimate punishment for Parma should they be declared insolvent?
Well, this is both the beauty and the frustration of Italy. The process a lot of times is kind of made up as you go along. There's been a lot of different players involved. Now, there's a new president, an Italian president that took over the club about 10 days ago. He was kind of appointed out of the blue by the league to kind of oversee what's going on. He said he was going to make some payments to pay the players, and they needed to make the payments up until December of last year. The players haven't received any wages all season, and that payment didn't go through. So now the city of Parma is involved on top of the Italian league, and not only the soccer federation, but pretty much the whole sporting federation is now involved. I read a quote from the president of the Italian Sporting Federation, so even above calcio and soccer, and he was like, I'm really puzzled by what's going on. We're trying to get to the bottom of this. So it's really very hard to tell where we're at. I mean, there's really 2 outcomes that I see possible. Either they're going to do what is called a piloted bankruptcy, where basically someone's just going to pay the players' wages, and Parma would go to Italy's second division next season. We saw that with Bari, who was another historical club a while ago, or they could go completely bankrupt, and basically Parma would have to start over. They'd have to call the club something else, and they'd have to start from the 4th division. I unfortunately saw that with my home team. Padova went through that last year. It's something in Italy that's unfortunately more common than you think. To give you an idea, in the 2nd division, they have the playoffs scheduled in a way that in case the team goes bankrupt,
right,
they still have time to bring in another one.
Yeah.
So that tells you all you need to know. There's a provision in the schedule just in case the team goes bankrupt. So unfortunately, these things are common in Italy, but this is the first time we're seeing a club of the caliber of Parma that so many people know about because of the great players they've had in the past.
Right, and obviously people who pay attention know Rangers went through this exact thing. Now, obviously, I'm sure the structure is different. Rangers now a big club playing in a very small division in Scotland, trying to make their way back up. So if Parma in their current iteration goes bankrupt, you would expect that they would reorganize, start in the 4th division, and try to climb their way up. If this is common or relatively common in Italy, certainly more than one club has had this happen to them. Does that speak to the obviously the organization, the structure of Italian football? Is there any way to prevent this, or is that something that, look, we're just going to have to deal with it because there's really no way around some clubs being poorly run or running out of money?
Well, I think there is some hope because we're seeing so many foreign investors interested in Italian clubs. I think that's really where I have hope. We saw Pallotta with Roma. We saw Bologna being bought by North American investors as well. And we saw Inter with Toir. So, my hope is that there's more foreign investors. I think, a lot of times presidents in Italy are more fans of the club. They kind of run their club like you and I would run our fantasy teams. And I think, that kind of really hurts in the long run. My guess is they're going to try to save Parma where they just go into the second division. They would be relegated anyway at this point, even say they didn't have all this. They'll just pay the immediate debts to the players. That's my guess. I don't think they're going to want it to go all the way down to the fourth division. What we usually see with clubs that have to go all the way down, they're already in lower divisions. So let's see what happens. The last huge club that had this issue was Napoli about 10, 12 years ago, and they've come out of it well. Let's hope that the same happens for Parma.
Does this potentially, and again, some of the talk is that if things go poorly, if the resolution to the situation is the worst of the possibilities, that Parma's remaining schedule, every match on the remaining schedule would be declared a 3-0 win for the opponent. Does that have a potential impact on the table as we're looking at it right now?
I think a little bit. I think, if anything, from what I understand, and this may change, that the results that already happened would stay. So Juve defeated Parma while Roma drew against them. That could have an impact on the potential title race. I think Juve still has to play Parma the second time. So I guess a Roma fan could say, well, Juve is going to get a win. We drew against them on the pitch. But I think Juve is pretty secure in the title regardless of that. I guess it would have an impact, on the other races to avoid relegation. So I don't think it makes a huge impact just because Parma would probably have been relegated anyway. It's just really another black eye for Italian football. There's been many recently, so I'm hoping they find the best solution possible out of this match.
I've looked at this table 4 times this morning. I've already messed it up twice. I did have it right. They have 3 wins and 2 draws on the season for their 10 points, as you said, bottom of the table. Let's look at some results from the weekend and just look at the state of Serie A as it is right now. We mentioned whether or not Roma and the fans would have a beef over the results, the rest of Parma's results being declared wins for their opponents. They had the opportunity to beat Parma. They didn't do that, and then they also underwhelmed again this weekend. 9 points back. I'm not sure that they really would have much complaint.
Yeah, I don't. I think at this point, Roma has only themselves to blame for how things went. Juve did give them a few chances. They grew against Cesena. They haven't been, their usual strong self. I think Juve rightfully is kind of focused a little bit on the Champions League, their big game tomorrow. So I think, they did give Roma some chances to get back in. If at the end of the season, Roma fans are going to complain about the Parma match and the referee decisions against Juve in that match a couple of months ago, I think they're kind of missing the point. I think, Roma this season, for one reason or another, they got off to a great start. They've been really hurt, and a lot of their key players, they've had a lot of injuries, but a lot of their key players are playing very poorly. Pjanic and De Rossi have been very poor this season. Kita, who came in as a free transfer, has pretty much been their best midfielder, and I think that says so much about them. They both had the injury to Strootman and Iturbe, their big signing this summer. But I think there's no way around it. Roma's been very disappointing recently. I think on January 6th, they were just 1 point behind Juve, and since then, they haven't won a match. So rough for them. I think they need to kind of salvage the Europa League. They need to go play against Feyenoord. They had a 1-1 draw at home. I think it's really important for them to make a run in the Europa League to at least salvage the season somewhat.
Speaking of Europe, as you mentioned, Juve maybe focused on their Champions League match tomorrow, hosting Dortmund. Obviously, Dortmund has had a bad run in the Bundesliga. Yeah. They're starting to put some results together there, but they've obviously been very good in the Champions League. When you look at this tie for Juventus, what is the key here to potentially getting by one of the more maddeningly and inconsistent clubs in Europe, but certainly one of the teams capable of playing very good soccer?
I think Juve's key players have to really step up. Tevez has won a Champions League before at United. He's been better in the Champions League this year. He ended his scoring drought. I think they really need him to have a great match. You hear all this talk about Pogba being worth 100 million euros, and to me, what better way to prove that he's worth a huge transfer fee by having a dominating performance in the Champions League, which, to be honest, off the top of my head, I can't think of a really signature moment for him in the Champions League. Vidal's had an up and down season. He's had a few clashes with Juve, with him staying out late. He rested against Atalanta on Friday. This is a great opportunity. So I think Juve, if the key players step up, they should be slight favorites against Dortmund, although Dortmund has, obviously better recent Champions League pedigree. But I was reading on Juve's expected starting lineup. They have almost double the amount of Champions League matches of Borussia Dortmund. They have a lot of guys that play international teams. So I think it's time for Juve to put up or shut up in the Champions League. They've been disappointing for years, and I think this is a great opportunity for them to turn it around. And I think it's time for their key players to show that they can do it in Europe.
What's your take on Allegri's, his pedigree, his ability to navigate this portion of the Champions League in charge of Juventus?
I think he deserves a lot of credit because I think his predecessor was a great coach. Conte deserves so much credit for turning Juve around, but he always looked at the Champions League as we're just happy to be here. We don't have revenues like other clubs. We can't really compete. Allegri, on the other hand, all season long has talked about being in the top 8 in Europe. When he was in the Champions League group, even when he was behind Atletico Madrid, he didn't just talk about qualifying. He talked about winning the group and being in first place. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for kind of changing the mentality a little bit in Europe. I think, with Milan, he did fairly well with his teams. He always ended up being eliminated by big clubs. So I think this is a good opportunity for him. I think he's convinced a lot of Juve fans that were very skeptical when he was hired. And I think, if he can get past this round, I think, he can be really, really thrilled with his first season with Juve.
I think we talked about when Allegri took over at Juve, it was maybe more about Conte leaving than it was about Allegri coming in, but there were some questions there. As you said, perhaps he's proven himself to the Juve fans. Let me ask you about Conte while I have you, though. Obviously, he moves on to the Italian national team. What's the state of the program at the moment under Conte, and is there satisfaction with the direction things are headed?
Well, I think it's been a little bit of a mixed bag. He got off to a strong start, and the last 2 matches, and this is going back to November, Italy struggled a little bit. They beat some smaller teams just 1-0. They struggled against Croatia when they played them in Milan. It was a 1-1 draw. I'm not surprised that Conte is very frustrated that he can't coach the players more. He tried to organize some stages with Serie A players right around this time, but the clubs wouldn't agree to send the players because of the European competitions. And quite frankly, I'm sure that if Conte had been coaching Juve and Italy's team wanted to take his players in the middle of February, I doubt he would have wanted to do that. So I think he's a little bit frustrated, but he should have seen the writing on the wall when you coach a national team. You just don't get to spend that much time with the players. There's been some speculation he could leave already. He's been linked to Milan and maybe some big clubs in Europe in the summer. So it wouldn't shock me completely if he were to leave in the summer. But I think, you look at who the other candidates were. The Italian Federation at least deserves a lot of credit for bringing the big name and probably the best candidate they had available.
Well, obviously, we're in the European Championship qualifying portion of the calendar, or the time frame right now as we're dealing with qualifying. Excuse me. Next year's tournament, obviously, being in France, opportunity for Italy to once again be one of the contenders for that tournament. How far away are they from being a challenger to Germany or Spain? Well, obviously Spain comes off a terrible World Cup, but certainly Germany. How close are they to becoming a real challenger? France is obviously going to be a favorite in that tournament.
I would agree. I mean, you look at the talent that France has compared to Italy or Germany and France and even still Spain, although they do have some young players coming up. I see Italy really struggle. They don't really have many good defenders coming up. Barzagli, who was probably one of their best defenders, hasn't played at all for Juve this season. Chiellini has struggled a little bit. Bonucci's been pretty good for Juve, but I just don't see a great defender on the horizon. To me, the only really world-class players under 30, on the Azzurri are Verratti and Balotelli when he's on form. So I see the cupboard. I don't see much talent for the Azzurri, but what needs to be said is that usually when Italy does really well in tournaments is when there's low expectations. And Conte is a master of using, low expectations as motivations for his team. So I'm curious to see how things go. I think, a lot of the players on the Azzurri need to finish the season strong. We're seeing guys like Garotti really struggling. So I'm curious to see how Conte integrates more young players on the team. But we've seen when he was at Juve, that's something he really doesn't like to do too much. But I think right now he's going to be forced into it. So I'm curious to see what he does when they start playing again in March.
We came out of the World Cup last year, David, with this notion, and several major figures within Italian football talking about a need to reinvigorate the national team, and clearly, a lot of that flows from the clubs. Italy has a reputation for choosing domestically based players over foreign-based players. Yep. Is any of that, before I let you go here, is any of that going to change? Is Conte going to have to maybe spread the net a little bit wider in a bid to reinvigorate the national team?
I think he's going to have to. I mean, we're seeing, especially at striker, we saw Immobile, who plays for Borussia Dortmund. Now, he struggled in the Bundesliga, but he's actually done pretty well in the Champions League, which ironically is one of the reasons why Juve sold him, is they weren't convinced he would be able to be considerably good in the Champions League, and he has. So he's playing him, and then there's Graziano Pelé, who's doing really well in the Premier League. And I think, those are the types of players that I think he needs to use more. And of course, Verratti is, that match against Chelsea, I think that put him on the map with a lot of people. I think he's probably the best player moving forward. That's the guy that I would build around, and he plays, abroad. And as he said, I think the culture needs to change a little bit. To me, what's a very interesting point is I think one of the reasons Italian clubs tend to struggle in the Champions League, Europa League, is they're just not as athletically fit as their opponents. And I think the fact that they have more of their players playing abroad is probably a good thing for the national team.
David Amoyal runs the English page over at Gianluca Di Marzio. Go check that out. Certainly follow him on Twitter, David Amoyal, Amoyal. David, appreciate your time and your insight as always. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Jason, for having me on. As always, thank you for promoting Serie A and Calcio as a whole. I definitely appreciate it.
Absolutely. There you go. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll open up those phone lines, 347-756-6276. Hit us up on Twitter at Soccer Morning. Soccer Morning brought to you by World Soccer Talk.
Gain the urge to run away, but hold her down with soggy clothes and breeze blocks. Shivers in your fever, scream me again. Never kisses, or do you ever send a full stop?
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on backheel.com with Jason Davis.
Here we go, back on Soccer Morning, brought to you by World Soccer Talk. And I had this thought this morning. If you missed it over the weekend in the Premier League, you had Joey Barton red carded, which just seems like it's like a warm blanket, is it not? To have Joey Barton being Joey Barton on the field, it's just comforting to see that things sometimes don't change, that the world cannot, that's not always a scary place when things don't go the way you expect them to. Joey Barton being Joey Barton warms me. Jonathan Tannenwald, you don't really warm me, but I'm glad to have you on the show. What's going on? You see that? That's called a professional segue, Jonathan. What's going on?
Well done. I wanted to throw something out there really quick that I saw over the weekend, and a couple other folks saw it, but I'm not sure whether all your listeners just want to put it out there. Fox put out a new TV ad for the Women's World Cup.
Yes.
Whose main slogan is that America has a score to settle. Now, I would like to know with whom and why Fox thinks that there is a score to settle here, because they just settled a fairly big one.
That's a good question. I mean, I think I don't mind the thread that they're pulling through the men's team and the women's team. I think that's the sense, right? That's the point that that America's soccer teams are, maybe we have a men's team and a women's team, but we're all sort of rooting for the same country. So let's I don't know who the score is being settled with or supposed to be settled with, but in terms of that element of it, you're the same umbrella should be applied to both teams.
Sure. No, I'm all for that. I think that the promotion of it in that way is a great thing, but I don't think the women are settling a score with Belgium. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
for Fox to put it out there settling scores, I just find, without any irony on their part, I find quite
okay. So you're in charge. Let's imagine Jonathan Tannenwald, and yeah, you're not trained for this. You're a journalist and an excellent one. You're in charge of marketing the Women's World Cup for Fox. What do you do? I mean, there's only limited avenues here. I mean, you could focus on the stars. That's the typical, that's the fallback. Okay, look, we've got Abby Wambach, we've got Alex Morgan. Here you go. Here's your stars. Here's Hope Solo. Well, I
might not be in charge of it, but I have a news organization that I'm trying to convince that it's worth their time to cover. So I know a few things.
Well, that's true. No, absolutely. So what would you do? I mean, I'm not saying that this is the wrong way. I'm not sure you're saying that either. You're just a little confused by the messaging.
No, I just think it's funny. I think having a score to settle might actually be the right way to put it, but I wouldn't have portrayed it as having. Well, you want to tie it into the national teams in general. I'm all for that, but the score to settle is with Germany and Japan, I believe. Okay,
but again, you're going back and trading on the women's.
I'm trading on the last Women's World Cup.
No, exactly.
Trading on the fact that, for as much discussion as there's been about, how much the U.S. should be developing talent for the next generation of the U.S. women's national team and how they've failed to do it over the last year or two or three. This is a Women's World Cup that they have to win.
Sure, but I think what Fox is perhaps the tact Fox is taking is maybe, okay, this is new to us, or relatively new to us. We are taking this on. We're trying to promote this. Not only are we going to put the men and the women under the same umbrella, which again is the absolute right way to go, but they're probably going to have to imagine that there's going to be a lot of people watching this World Cup, or perhaps they're trying to attract a lot of people who didn't watch the last Women's World Cup, who don't know that the United States had those, don't know the situation with Germany and Japan, Jonathan. I imagine that's again, so it's not ancient history, but it's certainly 4 years is a long time.
Sure, although a lot of people watched that Women's World Cup 4 years ago.
Sure, they did. But again, I imagine that Fox is saying we're sort of resetting things here. Yeah. Again, they don't have an immediate score to settle with anybody in their group. And in order to get to a point where they're going to be able to score, again, I don't know who they're settling the score with. I'm with you on that fact. It is rather humorous. You have anything else for us, Jonathan?
I don't. I think you've got another caller.
Yes, I do. I've crossed the streams here. Thanks for the call, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Jonathan Tannenwald, the goalkeeper on Twitter. Go follow him. In the meantime, here we go. 347 on the air. What's up?
Hey, what's going on, man? How's it going?
Who's this?
This is Ty in New York.
What's going on, Cy?
Yeah, well, I got a pair of questions about the business of soccer. I've been a fan, full disclosure, I've been a fan of the sport now for maybe a good 7 years, mostly EPL, mostly overseas European stuff. And, with the coming of this new franchise here in New York, I'm only a couple of blocks from Yankee Stadium, so I figure, I'll get into the MLS now, I'll become a season ticket holder. Okay. And now I'm hearing about a possible work stoppage. Yeah. I mean, this is like, I literally heard nothing about this, 3 months ago when we had the Lampard debacle, but now all of a sudden this is on the plate. Yeah. And it's at the 11th hour. So I want to know, pretty much from somebody, like you, is well versed in, what's going on with the MLS. To what extent should I be worried, and exactly what are the points of contention in terms of revenue sharing? Is owners being unrealistic or selfish, or the players being delusional?
I don't think it's about money straight up, Si. It's about free agency, which MLS players don't have. Now, I explained this to somebody who's not particularly a soccer. My little brother. He knows a little bit. He knows what I do. He tries to bring a couple of things up when I see him. He's visiting from out of town. So last night I'm talking to him and I'm saying, hey, MLS players might strike. And he goes, why? And I said, well, because they're trying to get free agency. And for him, the fact that they don't have free agency is mind-blowing, because in baseball, free agency, football, free agency, basketball, free agency, every other soccer player in the world outside of the United States has free agency. So this is what the players are going for. They want to be able to, when their contract runs out, they want to be able to pick where they go and play. The league is against this idea because it creates competition for players within MLS, and MLS is built to limit that. All of these owners are in this together. They operate as one big business rather than individual clubs. So they don't want a player his contract to run out. They don't want Team A to be bidding against Team B for his services, because that drives up his salary. And if that happens across the board, they're going to be spending more money for the same players. Essentially, there's a salary.
So how is that dealt with now?
Well,
what's the current state of affairs?
The current state of affairs is that when a player's contract runs out, his rights are still held by the team he was playing for. And in order for him, he either has to sign a new contract with them, or
not play soccer.
Well, there are the league's argument will be that there are other leagues he could go play in. He doesn't have to play in MLS. There's a second division. There's NASL. The Cosmos are right, they're down the road from you. I don't know how long it would take you to get there, but the Cosmos are in NASL. They're willing to pay some guys. You got other teams in that league. You actually have other opportunities outside of the United States. Now, sometimes you got to qualify, with work permits and everything else, but there are opportunities. You can go to Mexico and maybe catch on. So MLS will always say, we're not restricting their opportunities because there are other leagues. It's not like the NFL where there's one professional football league that everybody has to play in. You're not gonna leave the NFL and go play anywhere else. So
that sounds like their legal argument in court. That doesn't necessarily sound like their ethical argument.
No, I'm with you on that, and I think most MLS fans are on the side of the players when it comes to who's right and who's wrong in this push-pull. But again, the owners are protecting their investment, and if you're new to this, maybe you don't know, and some MLS fans probably don't understand how close the league was to folding 10 years ago, 15 years ago, how thin the league claims the margins are now. I mean, the league still claims they're losing $100 million a year. Some of these owners who have been in this league for a long time, who started MLS, have lost a ton of money. And so it becomes this thing of whether or not you understand a businessman's position of, I don't want to lose any more money, or I want to see my investment be secured, and therefore not spend as much as it'll take to keep the league going if there's free agency. So it's a very delicate balance. I think most fans are on the side of the players, though, Si.
Yeah, I mean, for good reason. That makes sense to me. Now, to what extent do you feel as though that structure may lead to, or has kept the league from growing as quickly as it would like to? I mean, I understand it's it's an up and coming league, and it's going in the right direction.
Well, I think you can look at a couple of
those kind of policies, and and structuring your business in that way a hindrance to?
You can look at it a couple of different ways. In one way, no, absolutely not, because if you're a guy sitting on a fortune and you want to get into sports, and you look at the NFL, okay, I'm not spending $1 billion on a team. Same thing in basketball or baseball. Those are closed shops. Those ownerships don't change that often, and when they do, it's a lot of money. MLS is much lower entry level. I mean, $100 million for New York City FC is a lot of money. That's more than anybody thought MLS was going to get for an expansion team. So that's still a fraction of what it would cost to buy an NFL team or an NBA team.
That's Cowboys, jersey rights.
At the same time, so what you've got is business people or wealthy owners who are willing to take a risk on MLS or willing to buy into MLS because they have better cost certainty than you would in almost any other sport. They know that there are protections built in place or put in place with this league that are going to keep them from losing a lot of money. Plus, it's a shared burden because of the way MLS operates. On the flip side of that, you could certainly argue that having this single entity structure, having some of the restrictions on spending, have prevented MLS from growing in terms of the quality of play on the field and and therefore the number of people watching, say, on television, which is how you build your revenue in modern sports.
You got to attract the fans through product. And the product is the players on the field. If they don't have the quality, then it's not attractive.
I don't think MLS has expansion teams in New York and Orlando and potentially Sacramento, and certainly successful teams in Seattle and Portland and some of these other places if they weren't operating under the structure that they are. But now, as you come against a CBA negotiation, as the players sit across from the owners and say, hey, you got to let us go where we want to go, you could certainly argue, and this is where I am, that it's time to take some of those shackles off.
Okay.
All right, man. Appreciate the phone call. Anything else, Si?
I don't want to monopolize your time. You have anybody else? So, I do kind of have one more.
Hey, you know what? Nobody else is calling in. It's your show right now. Go for it.
All right, cool. I'm trying to get a better feel for how financial fair play is going to work, or when your effects it's going to have. Now, I was listening to a podcast, a Liverpool-centric podcast, in which they were pretty much making a case that financial fair play would actually have the opposite effect of its intended purpose. That it will kind of lock in a permanent class structure in terms of haves and have-nots.
Yeah, it will.
It seems like, and you know what, the argument was like pretty convincing. It seemed like that's exactly what those policies would do. Now, if we're going to have a permanent, underclass and a permanent, overbearing class in terms of oligarchs in European soccer, how long is it going to be until we just abandon the whole countries thing and just go to a super league?
I think about that all the time, Si. And you look at the way things are in Spain with Barcelona and Real Madrid dominating the television revenue. As you said, and actually that's where I fall. And I'm not even sure that financial fair play was originally conceived to have any intent on bringing up smaller clubs or allowing smaller clubs to compete. That wasn't the intent. The intent is to to make clubs operate within their means. That's it. That's it. End of story. Now,
within their specific means.
Yes, exactly. And when you do that, you completely calcify all of those tiers that you're talking about. And so, and look, hey, you know what? Good for Mansour and City Football Group for getting in while they did, because they wouldn't be able to do that now under financial fair play. And they even got dinged on some stuff the last time that the books were checked. So did PSG. But now that they've already got all that money in, and now that their revenues have crept up, they should be able to stay where they're at. But Manchester United and Arsenal and Chelsea, those clubs are going to be solidified as the top. And it's not like anything changes. So, I mean, this is the way things have been going. But it's going to make it harder for a club like Southampton to be good year to year to year. They may have a great season. And the same thing, Atletico Madrid's got some new investment. But again, it's because financial fair play requires clubs to only spend the revenue that they're making as a football club rather than having outside investment. I mean, the financial fair play rules say that the owner can't write a check to his club to subsidize buying a player or to do anything to improve. I think maybe there's some allowances when it comes to infrastructure, like training grounds and the like.
And whatnot.
But in terms of the playing product, you're right. It's 100% going to create a situation where it's going to be haves and have-nots. And if you're a have-not, you're always going to be a have-not.
Yeah, see, because I'm worried about Liverpool not being able to make that jump into being a permanent top four club because just structure-wise, they may be locked out in terms of what they're willing to, in terms of their wage structure. They won't be competitive.
This is why building that new stadium is so important to Liverpool. If they can get that new stadium and they can get their game day revenues up, that'll allow them to be within financial fair play regulations and stay in the top tier, the top 4 or 5 in the Premier League year to year to year.
Yeah,
and you got to be in Champions League.
That's all well and good as long as you also kind of promise to not price out. It's a strange
absolutely.
thing. Absolutely. You don't want to price out. You don't want to price out your fans. You don't want to price out, the most rabid fans who create the atmosphere that allows you to have $1 billion TV contracts that are sellable.
This is
in terms of international.
This is why fans should be very careful about looking at financial fair play as some sort of solution to European football financial problems, or even looking at Michel Platini as anything else but a crony for the big clubs. And you asked about it. He's Sepp Blatter light, essentially. You asked about whether or not we're moving towards a Super League. I mean, it's going to take something major, and somebody's really going to have to put themselves out there in terms of breaking the tradition of these domestic leagues. But I mean, I think it's conceivable. You could see 2, 3, 4 clubs leave England, 2 or 3 clubs leave Spain, 2 or 3 clubs leave France and Germany and the like, form a Super League, and then everybody else continues to play their domestic soccer. Now, I don't know how that will impact how we view the sport, and whether or not a club like West Ham or a club like Norwich or a club like Everton will ever get recognized and be able to draw more fans. I mean, if Manchester United and Arsenal and Chelsea and Man City all leave the Premier League and go play in a Super League every season and essentially replace the Champions League, do people even care about what Everton's doing anymore except Evertonians now? I don't know. It's a difficult question.
I mean, I would think the BPL would be all right. I would, you don't have to worry about, Bundesliga overall attendance, a couple other leagues, in the margins. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's what you have now. When the 2 big Spanish clubs come to town, that's when everybody else in the league, is able to make their nugget in terms of ticket sales.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And then the rest of the year, they're scraping by. So if they were to leave on a permanent basis, then that league, may fall apart or just only be a league in name alone.
I'll tell you this. Thanks for the phone call, Simon. I'll let you go. But when you talk about whether or not the EPL would still be okay, remember that Sky, BT Sport, all of those television contracts, the foreign contracts that the league gets, that money is shared. You obviously make more the more you're on television. The bigger clubs therefore make more money because they're on TV more often. But if the big clubs pulled out, those television contracts change drastically. They're no longer worth as much as they are now, which fundamentally changes the amount of money coming in to those smaller clubs, which again may impact the quality of the league over the long term. And even over the short term, as you see the top players from each club leave in an effort to get into those Super League clubs. I mean, look, this is all speculation. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but it's because Europe is relatively small in terms of geography. It's not that difficult to conceive of a future in which those clubs, in a bid, just like the English clubs did back in '92 when they formed the Premier League, they wanted control of their television. They wanted to be able to control and make as much money as possible. And the First Division and the FA weren't allowing them to do that. You could very well see something happen like that, where the top clubs in Europe all break away. I hope it doesn't happen. I'm a traditional kind of guy. I'd like to see everything stay the way it is. Now, the money is, again, insane, and it's creating a top class, an elite class of clubs, and then everybody else. And that may never change. But at least occasionally, Burnley can tie Chelsea in the league, and Manchester United can lose to Swansea in the league. And you take those things out of the equation, and instead of Manchester United, Swansea's the biggest club that Swansea can beat becomes, I'm sorry about this, Spurs or something. It doesn't quite have the same feel about it. All right. That's an excellent phone call from Cy. Appreciate you chiming in there. Good questions as always. Not what I intended to talk about, but who cares? That's why we're here. That's why the phone lines are open every single day. All right. Here's your reminder. Go buy yourself a Soccer Morning mug at backheel.com/store. Go buy a t-shirt. 30fc.com is the exclusive place to get a Soccer Morning t-shirt. We're on iTunes. Ratings and reviews always help out there. And remember, the live show, worldsoccertalk.com/live. Am I missing anything? I feel like I'm missing something. Oh, here's something I wanted to do. Here's an open call. I need musical selections. I think it's time to freshen up the music here at Soccer Morning. If you're into music, if you like music, send me suggestions. I may not like it. I've got my own personal taste, but at least I want to broaden my horizons a bit as we look towards the future here at Soccer Morning. And it's a little stale. I mean, I like all the stuff we've got. I mean, this is a fine song. Maybe it's time to freshen things up. Hit us up at Soccer Morning with all of that, or me, Davis JSN on Twitter. Thank you very much to Kristan Heneage and David Amoyal. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.
pet play.